If you had to write, right now, what enough looks like for your life, what would you write? You don't need a DeLorean, although that would be pretty cool, especially if you could go back in time.
The steady path, keep it moving slow. Every step you take is the way you grow. Take the steady path, let the rhythm guide. One step at a time to the other side.
In 1984, a guitarist called Nigel Tufnell showed a journalist his amplifier. For those who haven't seen, this is Spinal Tap. And if you haven't, please just stop this podcast right now and go and watch it. It's one of the finest and funniest films ever committed to celluloid. I genuinely mean that. Come back when you're done. Anyway, Nigel is the lead guitarist of the world's loudest rock band called Spinal Tap. He's explaining to journalist Marty DeBurgi, played by the late great Rob Reiner, that his amplifier is special because while most amplifiers go to 10, his go to 11. Does that make it louder? Asked the journalist. Nigel considers this. Well, it's one louder, isn't it? And the journalist stares at him and says, well, why don't you just make 10 louder? And Nigel looks at the amplifier and he looks back and he's just genuinely baffled by the question and he says, but these go to 11. It is, on one level, completely and wonderfully absurd. But on another level, it's the most accurate portrayal of how most of us relate to money, ambition, success, and status. We don't ask how much is enough. We just reach for another notch. We go to 11, then 12, then 13. And nobody ever actually stops to ask, well, why don't we just make 10 louder? And it's not just Nigel. Mick Jagger has been singing the same thing since 1965. I can't get no satisfaction. 60 years of touring. Still the same feeling, still just out of reach. Rock music worked this out long before the rest of us. So that's what we're doing today. We're answering the most important question I know. How much is enough? Here's something I've noticed in my 26 years as an advisor, sitting across the table from people making some of the most important decisions about their lives. When I ask them what their financial goal is, most can answer. Retire at 60, pay off the mortgage, help the children onto the property ladder, things like that. Clear, concrete and achievable. But when I ask the follow-up question, well, what comes after that? What does enough actually look like? What's the number or the life or the feeling that tells you this is it? I've arrived. The room gets very quiet. And it's not because people aren't intelligent, and it's not because they haven't thought about it, but because they've never been asked to define it. And in the absence of a definition, enough defaults to a very simple fallback. More than I currently have. And that, my friends, is a treadmill with no off switch. Morgan Housel writes about this in The Psychology of Money. He describes what he calls the inability to stop. People achieve a level of wealth they once dreamed of and they simply recalibrate. The new target sits 20% further ahead. The feeling of enough remains perpetually just out of reach, like a horizon you're walking towards. It's not weakness and it's not greed, it's just deeply and almost unavoidably human. But it doesn't have to run the whole show. Epictetus, the philosopher who began his life as a slave and whose ideas about lasted empires, observed something that I find startling every time I come back to it. He watched people around him who had a great deal more than he did, more wealth, more status, and more freedom. And he noticed something. They were not happier. His conclusion was this: he is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. Now, this is not an argument for poverty. It's not a suggestion that ambition is a bad thing or that you shouldn't want good things. It's just something subtler. It's a recognition that freedom, genuine felt daily freedom, comes not from acquiring more, but from needing less. From reducing the distance between what you have and what you need to feel okay. Seneca, writing with charismatic Roman directness, put it this way: if you want to make a man happy, add not to his possessions, but subtract from his desires. It's not a commentary on bank balances or a commentary on inner states. A man with £10 million and an insatiable need for 20 is, by Seneca's measure, poor. A man with enough to live with dignity, security, and meaning, and no compulsion to exceed it, is rich. And Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that contentment was not a destination, but a practice, a daily discipline. You've got to ask yourself each morning, what do I actually need? What can I release? What can I get rid of? What is already quietly enough? That practice doesn't diminish ambition, it gives direction. I want to talk about a book that genuinely changed how I think about time and limits. It's called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And that number, 4,000, is roughly how many weeks most of us get if we're fortunate. Work it out, it's not very many. Berkman's argument is counterintuitive, but I think it's brilliant. He says the reason most of us are perpetually dissatisfied is that we fundamentally refuse to accept limits. We live as though, given sufficient effort and enough time, we could do everything, be everything, and have everything. But we can't. We are finite, and pretending otherwise doesn't liberate us. It exhausts us. His proposition, and I find this profoundly freeing rather than depressing, is that the moment you genuinely accept your limits, something shifts. It's not resignation, it's clarity. When you truly accept that you cannot do everything, you become much better at deciding what to actually do. When you accept that enough cannot be infinite, you become capable of recognizing it when it arrives. That single idea applies just as powerfully to money and ambition as it does to time. Are you waiting until you have enough before you start living fully? Or are you willing to start living fully now with what you have? Arnold Schwarzenegger, one of my favourite action stars, has lived what might be the most improbable life in recorded history. He was born in a small Austrian village. He became the world's greatest bodybuilder, winning Mr. Olympia 7 times. He became one of the biggest film stars on the planet. And yes, Terminator's an absolute masterpiece. Predator is phenomenal. And Total Recall rewards multiple viewings, each more baffling and sort of brilliant than the last. He then became governor of California, which is quite unbelievable again. It just amazes me. In his book, Be Useful, which I recommend to clients, Schwarzenegger talks about what actually drove him. And it was never the trophy, it was never the title or the number or the acclaim. What drove him was the work itself. It was who he became in the process of pursuing it. His definition of enough was never a destination. It was a standard of effort, of contribution, and of usefulness. And that reframe from accumulation to contribution is significant. It moves the goalpost somewhere you can actually reach. James Clear, whose book Atomic Habits I recommend to my clients, makes a related observation that I think is one of the most useful ideas in the whole book. He says, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. In other words, don't define enough as a destination you'll arrive at one day. Define it as a way of living. A set of habits, values, and daily choices that, when you're living them well, they constitute a good life. Not because you've stopped wanting to grow, but because the growing itself is the thing, not some future state on the far side of it. Mark Manson, whose book title I'll reference, but I'll leave to your imagination, as this is a professional podcast, has a concept he calls the backwards law. It comes originally from the philosopher Alan Watts, and it goes like this. The more desperately you pursue a feeling, like happiness, success, contentment, and enough, the more it eludes you. Conversely, the moment you stop white-knuckling the pursuit and get genuinely clear on your values, what actually matters, not what you think should matter, and not what your neighbours appear to have, and not what LinkedIn tells you success looks like, something loosens. the thing that you were looking for becomes visible again. I want to be careful here because this is not a counsel of passivity. Manson's point is not stop wanting things. It's subtler. It's about getting honest about what you want and why. Because a lot of what we chase isn't actually what we want. It's what we think having it would feel like. And those two things are almost never the same. Morgan Housel adds the practical dimension. He says, the hardest financial skill isn't selecting the right investment, it's getting the goalpost to stop moving. Because when enough is almost 20% farther than where you are, no amount of progress ever registers as progress. You're permanently behind regardless of how far you've come. His prescription is deceptively simple. Define enough before you have it, not as a vague feeling, as a specific life. What does the day look like? What relationships are in it? What experiences does it contain? And then, and this is the part that requires genuine character, hold that line when you get there. Because the world will keep offering you 11. You have to be the one who decides 10 is loud enough. So one question just to take away from today, just one. If you had to write right now what enough looks like for your life, what would you write? Not what would look impressive and not what's aspirational. Not the number that'd silence a difficult conversation at a Christmas dinner. What would actually be enough? The life, the relationships, the mornings, the evenings, the experiences that, if you had them, would mean you'd made the most of your 4,000 weeks. Back to the Future is, for my money, one of the greatest films ever made. Watched it more times than I can remember. Still my favourite film of all time. And the thing that strikes me every time is that Marty McFly spends the entire film trying to get back, not forward. Back to the present he already had and didn't fully appreciate. And at the end of the film, Doc Brown looks at him and says, your future hasn't been written yet. No one's has. Your future is whatever you make it, so make it a good one. You don't need a DeLorean, although that would be pretty cool, especially if you could go back in time. I'd go back to the mid-80s almost certainly. You don't need 1.21 gigawatts. You don't need 11. You just need to decide what good looks like. You just need to define enough. Because once you've done that, everything else becomes a choice. Thank you for listening to episode 3. Next time we're going to talk about the comparison trap, why we measure ourselves against everyone else, why it's almost always makes us feel worse, and what to do instead. I think you'll recognise yourself in it. Until next time, slow down, think clearly, keep walking your steady path. I'm Paul Cleworth. Thanks for listening.
Just keep moving.